Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. Jim Reads Too Slow. I'm Jim. And New World's November 2022, week one, is in the books. New World's November, of course, is a month-long reading event created by the Bookish Bryants, during which short works of science fiction, the reading of these short works is encouraged. Now, during week one, the theme has been terrestrial science fiction, or science fiction stories that take place predominantly on Earth. I read 7 science fiction stories during this past week, starting off with H.P. Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness. I read it from this collection from Barnes & Noble. This novella, Mountains of Madness, is a science fiction horror story published in 1931, I believe. And it's about a fictitious 1930 expedition to the mysterious and terrifying continent of Antarctica. It falls in the Cthulhu series of stories. The story is told in first person by the expedition leader, William Dyer, who was a university professor, a geologist. And it's told in order to dissuade an upcoming expedition from going to Antarctica. Otherwise, it's assumed that the surviving members of Dyer's expedition would have kept everything that they learned, everything that they discovered a secret from the rest of humanity, which in short, it amounts to the archaeological, biological, and historical find of the ages, what they discovered in Antarctica, which will forever change everything that humanity believes if anyone ever found out about it, because they're most likely not, because they're just too terrible, too horrific for the general public to know about. So while they're in Antarctica, a party from Dyer's expedition discovers a number of creatures who they believe to be long dead, like 50 million years dead. They're discovered in a collapsed tunnel. But in true horror story fashion, the creatures revive and slaughter the entire party. Dyer, who has lost radio contact with the group, of course, then goes in search of them. He discovers the carnage, and then goes on a survey mission, taking with him a graduate student named Danforth. Now, Dyer and Danforth fly up to this plateau, and inside a ring of mountains higher than the Himalayas, they discover the ruins of this vast city. Excuse me. Now, the city was an outpost of the culture known as the Elder Things, who came from the stars, inhabited Earth before humans came on the scene. And it's hinted that this culture may have ultimately been responsible for the rise of humanity. So Dyer and Danforth are exploring the remains of this city. They enter the buildings. They discover a species of blind, 6-foot tall penguins that are just kind of wandering around. Lovecraft apparently found penguins horrifying. But if I hadn't known that, I would probably have just taken them as an attempt at humor. So these two men, they're exploring the various buildings. They're finding these statues, carvings, stone carvings, murals, and they're able to interpret these carvings that they find in buildings and hallways and wherever. And they learn the entire history of this pre-human civilization. And then they discover the remains of the creatures that killed the other members of the expedition. They had gone to this city. And then further, they discover the creature that killed them before narrowly making an escape to sound the warning. They get out of the city, and on their way out, Danforth sees something, or thinks he sees something off in the distance, at kind of an even higher set of mountains that basically causes him to go insane. Okay, I liked the story generally. I wasn't really all that horrified by the horror part, but the science fiction part really kind of did have me going. To tell you the truth, if I were thinking of going on a scientific expedition to this place, they would have had me at 50 million-year-old creatures that come to life when you thaw them out. And also these tens of millions of year old wall carvings that are clear enough that a geologist could read them and interpret the entire history of this civilization. We would probably put together some kind of a team whose task would be to, watch out for this monster from the abyss below the city. But I don't think, Dyer's warning would really keep me away from an expedition to a place like this. So anyway, as far as sub themes, alien archaeology, definitely. Alien from a human standpoint. War and military, I could make an argument for that, since Dyer's interpretation of the murals included information about the invasion of the Cthulhu's people from space and their war against these elder things. But that's not, it's not a real strong argument. Genre crossing, yes, science fiction and cosmic horror. First Contact, sure. One that didn't really go all that well for humans. Invasion, possibly. The Cthulhu folks invaded the world of the Elder Things, and then the humans are invaders of the world of these ancient creatures. So that's another kind of tenuous argument, but could be made. Okay, so that was At the Mountains of Madness. Next, I read The Velt by Ray Bradbury. I could have waited until week 4, Robots and AI, for that one, but this story does take place on Earth. So it's about a couple of kids who replace their parents with their new, completely automated house's holodeck. There's a Star Trek reference. And all the safety protocols are off on this holodeck. The parents realize too late that their kids are soulless, ungrateful little monsters. And that's The Veldt. I didn't read too much Ray Bradbury growing up. I know I should have, but I'm developing a real appreciation for his stuff now. I read There Will Come Soft Rains last year, and I really love that story. It's also about a smart house. Really good one. I didn't find any of the sub themes in The Veldt. So I followed that up with a couple of short stories from the collected stories of Arthur C. Clarke, which I have in ebook form from the library. I read The 9 Billion Names of God and The Awakening. The 9 Billion Names of God, the bulk of the story takes place in Tibet, where 2 computer technicians are helping a group of monks complete their list of all the possible names of God. And when the monks complete their task, something really interesting begins to happen. In The Awakening, the rich old man, known as the Master, has himself frozen and put into a secret tomb somewhere on Mount Everest until medical science is able to come up with a cure for his heart issues. So he's put in deep freeze for 100 years. And during that time, a cure is discovered, but no one wants the Master to be brought back. So he's left frozen. And then gradually, he's completely forgotten about. And he lies there frozen for eons of time. There are geologic changes that take place. The Himalayas become the floor of a vast ocean. um, taking his tomb to the bottom, miles below the surface. There are where the sediment, covers him, turns to a thick chalk. He's kind of locked in this layer of rock for however many years. And the changes continue. He's brought up in the mountains again. There are evolutionary changes as well. And then one day the master's tomb is just by chance discovered, and he's revived. And as he opens his eyes to see who has brought him back, he gets a big surprise. And I'll leave it at that. A sub-theme for this story, I believe, would clearly be far future. So then I read 3 Hal Clement stories to close out the week from this book, The Best of Hal Clement. I started out with Impediment. This is a first contact story that focuses on the limitations of telepathy as a means of communication. A spaceship full of these large insect-like creatures, Mothmen possibly is one way they're described, is on Earth, up near the Arctic Circle. They're trying to explain to an Earthman that they need arsenic for their ship's weapons system. Now, they're from a feudalistic society on a planet where factions are constantly at war with one another. They live by piracy, attacking the vessels of their enemies, shooting them up with poison gas shells that kill the crew inside, but leave the cargo basically unharmed, so that they can then tow the ship away and clean it out. Their planet has a much lower gravity than Earth, but they're here on Earth, dying, being crushed by the gravitational pull of the planet, rather than take off with without fully functioning weapons. They communicate with one another through a kind of telepathy. And because they all think alike, there's no problem with communicating between each other. But when they start trying to explain their needs to this human camper who happens by, gradually they do start to make progress after a fashion, but they don't think alike. They're beings from completely different cultures. They don't really trust each other. And in the end, the human can't really bring himself to help these aliens with their mission to commit piracy, as he sees it. Sub-themes: war, military, first contact. Next, I read, also from The Best of Hal Clement, A Question of Guilt. Now, this is kind of a horror story. It takes place during the Roman Empire. A man named Mark of Bistrida is trying to find a way to save his last surviving son, Kairos. His children have all died of a genetic blood disorder. Their blood doesn't coagulate or doesn't clot properly. It very slowly, if at all. So the smallest scrape or the smallest cut could prove fatal. Now, Mark and his wife, Judith, they're frantic. He's going all over the place. He goes to Rome. He consults with physicians and healers in hopes of learning anything that will help. It's revealed also that he has kidnapped a child from a neighboring village and performed experiments, which as a result, the child has died. He has come up with the idea of putting blood into his son to counteract the loss of blood and slow coagulation. So he begins creating a device. He's using a serpent's tooth attached to a bowl that he hopes he can use to transfuse blood back into his son as he as he loses blood. But he soon learns that after only a few drops, the blood stops moving through the tooth because his blood is healthy and coagulates. By the end of the story, Kairos has died, and Judith apparently has killed herself over the guilt. She believes that the blood disorder is her fault, and so she's unconsolable. Mark, he's just about to kill himself when his wife's servant slash slave, Aletha, convinces him to go on and to live for his work. But that's not a ray of hope in the darkness, or something good will come out of all of this bad kind of an ending. This is dark. This story is it kind of surprised me. And the more I reread the last few paragraphs, the more creeped out I get. The story's two survivors, Mark and Aletha, they're destined to become a kind of vampires. I think the story is about the obsessive pursuit of a scientific objective. In this case, a medical objective, without any regard for ethics, without morality. So yeah, this story surprised me, and sub-theme, genre crossing. I would definitely call this a sci-fi horror story. Now, my third Hal Clement story, also from this book, get the right angle there, it's a novella called Assumption Unjustified. Now, it's also a kind of vampire story, but it's a real palate cleanser after the a question of guilt. For one thing, there's a lot of humor in this story. The cover photo of the book comes from this story. These two bug-like amphibious aliens, here's one of them, Thrykar, that's probably Thrykar, who is a noted chemist on his planet, and his young bride, Tess, who is an artist. They're on vacation, and they stop on Earth for refreshment before continuing to their destination. They stop at a small quarry town, and hide their ship down under the water in one of the abandoned quarries that's filled up with water, as they do. Then they scope out the countryside and begin identifying potential subjects, people who Thrykar can get blood from. He has to get his blood from intelligent beings, something that has to do with the development of their central nervous system. His people do this on other planets as well. They have a system worked out where they can find a subject, render them unconscious painlessly, without their knowledge, drain a quantity of blood, an amount that won't really do them any harm. And then they look after them until, just to make sure that they can get up and get on their way. It's all very civilized. They're friendly, good-natured aliens. And they don't really want to cause any trouble. At one point, Thrykar makes a miscalculation, not realizing that his subject was a child, and he had drained an adult-sized portion of blood from this child. That's this school kid here. He's walking by and gets zapped by one of Thrykar's knockout bubbles and gets drained a little too much. So on top of taking too much blood, Thrykar examines the kid, takes him back to his ship, and gives him a thorough examination. He wants to find out what's wrong with him, why he won't wake up. The kid has an infected scrape on his foot, which it's affected his whole physiology. So Thrycar thinks that he may have caused serious damage because of this pre-existing thing and then taking too much blood. So he takes the child into town at the risk of being seen, where the child will be found and taken to a doctor. Thrycar and Tess have this book that contains all the relevant information about the creatures, intelligent creatures and their planets that they may make contact with during all of their travels. Now, this book is not entirely up to date. And based on the information in the book, these two come to a variety of assumptions about the Earth and about humans that are not entirely correct. That may be where the title comes from, especially the final assumption that Thrycar makes, which is really unjustified. I really did enjoy this story, and I would highly recommend it. Sub-themes for this one would include first contact, humor, books. This is the one I found that has the library/books theme, possibly alien romance. Thrycar and Tess are newlyweds, and there's a little bit of romance, not anything touchy-feely or anything like that, but there are terms of endearment and romantic looks and that kind of thing. But I could make a case for romance. So that's my week 1 reading, terrestrial science fiction. Now we go into week 2, which will be extraterrestrial science fiction stories, stories that take place anywhere else but Earth. So I'm going to get right on that. And until I talk to you about that next time, have a good one, BookTube.